Ladies and gentlemen, one day they will finally understand exactly what they lost. But by then, your voice won't be waiting on the other end of the silence anymore. Your heart won't be standing at the same door hoping to be chosen. Your presence will have become nothing more than a memory. And that memory will follow them into the quietest corners of their life from then on. They may forget the arguments eventually. They may forget the exact words that were said. They may even convince themselves that losing you was somehow necessary. But they won't forget how safe they felt in your presence. They won't forget the way you understood emotions. They could never quite explain themselves. They won't forget the person you were before their neglect slowly taught you to become someone they could no longer reach at all. And when they finally recognize your worth, it won't bring them any peace. It will haunt them instead. The deepest regret was never losing someone, because they simply disappeared. The deepest regret is realizing they disappeared because you repeatedly failed to value them while they were still right there in front of you. Human beings very often only recognize value through absence. We grow accustomed to whatever is consistently available to us. We start mistaking loyalty for weakness, patience for dependence, kindness for obligation, forgiveness for standing permission. We assume the person who's remained through every storm will simply remain through every future storm as well. But no human soul was ever designed to endure endless emotional abandonment. There comes a moment when a person doesn't stop loving you, but stops sacrificing themselves to keep proving that love. There comes a moment when the heart grows tired of explaining pain to someone who benefits from pretending not to understand it at all. There comes a moment when silence is no longer a strategy for getting attention. It becomes instead a final act of self-preservation. And that's exactly the moment everything changes. People often imagine that losing someone happens dramatically. They think it occurs during a final argument, a slammed door, a blocked number, a painful goodbye scene. But the truth is that people are usually lost slowly instead. They are lost in the unanswered messages. They are lost in the apologies that never produce any actual changed behavior. They are lost in the promises repeatedly broken over time. They are lost every single time their tears get treated as manipulation. They are lost every time their needs get called excessive. They are lost every time they feel completely alone while sitting right beside the person who claims to love them. By the time they physically leave, they've already spent months, sometimes years, emotionally preparing for that departure. You may believe someone walked away suddenly, but perhaps they'd actually been saying goodbye in 1,000 invisible ways long before that. Their silence grew longer over time. Their explanations grew shorter. Their expectations grew smaller. Their hope grew weaker with each passing week. They stopped asking you to understand because they'd finally understood you didn't actually intend to. This is one of the great tragedies built into human relationships. We very often only become serious once the consequences become permanent and irreversible. As long as someone is still calling, we believe we still have time. As long as someone is still crying, we believe they still care enough to stay. As long as someone is still arguing, we believe they're still emotionally invested in this. But once they become calm instead, something profound may have already happened inside them. That calmness gets mistaken for acceptance quite often, but sometimes it's actually detachment instead. It's the quietness of a soul that has finally stopped expecting what another person has repeatedly proven unwilling to give them. It's the stillness that arrives once a person finally accepts that love cannot be carried by one single heart alone forever. You may have met people who never appreciated you until you finally withdrew your energy from them. They never noticed how much you contributed, simply because your contribution had become part of the background of their entire existence. They enjoyed the emotional shelter you provided without ever considering who was protecting you in return. They expected you to listen, but rarely asked what was actually happening inside you. They expected you to forgive, but never studied the wounds they kept creating in the process. They expected you to understand their distance, their confusion, their fear, their past, but they called you difficult the moment you asked for clarity, consistency, and basic respect in return. This kind of imbalance never continues forever. The psyche eventually rebels against everything that requires ongoing self-betrayal. There's a shadow living inside each person, a hidden collection of suppressed anger, unmet needs, abandoned dreams, unspoken truths. When you constantly silence yourself just to preserve a relationship, that particular shadow grows larger. Every truth you refuse to express doesn't simply disappear. It descends instead into the unconscious. There it waits patiently. It waits until your exhaustion finally becomes stronger than your fear of losing the relationship. It waits until your need for basic dignity becomes more powerful than your desire to be understood by them. It waits until the person you've been pretending to be can no longer contain the person you are actually becoming underneath. Then the shadow rises up, not always as rage, not always as revenge. Sometimes the shadow rises instead as pure clarity. You suddenly see the relationship without the fantasies that once protected you from seeing it clearly. You see the pattern instead of the promises. You see the actual behavior instead of the imagined potential. You see the person exactly as they are, not as you hoped they might eventually become. And once you've truly seen this clearly, you can't fully return to the earlier blindness again. This particular awakening can feel painful because it destroys an illusion you'd been protecting. But the destruction of that illusion is also the beginning of real liberation. For a long time, you may have believed your worth depended entirely on their recognition of it. You may have waited for them to choose you, praise you, protect you, regret hurting you. You may have imagined one sincere apology would somehow heal every single night you felt unseen. But your value was never actually created by their ability to perceive it correctly. Gold doesn't become worthless simply because someone mistakes it for a plain stone. A rare book doesn't lose its wisdom simply because it's placed in the hands of someone who refuses to read it. A loyal heart doesn't become ordinary simply because it was offered to someone who lacked the emotional maturity to honor it properly. Their failure to appreciate you was never proof that you lacked worth. It was very often evidence instead of the limits of their own awareness. People can only recognize in others what they've developed the capacity to understand within themselves first. A person disconnected from their own emotions may genuinely not understand emotional depth in someone else. A person unfamiliar with real accountability may interpret boundaries as pure punishment. A person who's never learned how to actually receive genuine love may distrust it, test it, or eventually destroy it entirely. This doesn't excuse the harm they caused you, but it does explain why your goodness as alone could never save them from themselves. You cannot love another person into consciousness. You cannot sacrifice enough of yourself to make someone else emotionally responsible. You cannot become so useful that they finally treat you as valuable. You cannot become so endlessly patient that they suddenly develop real empathy. Transformation was always an inner decision. It cannot be forced from the outside by anyone else. Once you understand this clearly, you stop asking, why wasn't I enough? You begin asking instead, why did I remain somewhere I was repeatedly made to feel insufficient? This particular question was never designed to blame you. It's designed instead to awaken you fully. The unconscious very often leads us toward relationships that reflect our own unresolved wounds. We may seek love from emotionally unavailable people simply because their distance feels strangely familiar to us. We may confuse anxiety with passion because uncertainty activates the exact parts of us that learn to chase affection as children. We may become attached not merely to the person themselves, but to the possibility of finally winning the love we were once denied somewhere else. This is exactly why leaving can feel like considerably more than just ending a relationship. It can feel like abandoning an entire lifelong psychological mission instead. You weren't only trying to be loved by them specifically. You may have been trying to prove you were lovable at all, period. And once you realize this, the entire struggle acquires a considerably deeper meaning. Perhaps they were never your final destination. Perhaps they were simply the mirror that revealed the wound you actually needed to heal. Perhaps the relationship never entered your life to complete you, but instead to expose the exact places where you'd already been abandoning yourself for years. The pain then becomes information instead. It teaches you exactly where your boundaries were weak. It teaches you why you tolerated inconsistency for so long. It teaches you how easily empathy can quietly become self-neglect instead. It teaches you that understanding someone's trauma never requires accepting their mistreatment of you. It teaches you that love without reciprocity eventually becomes emotional servitude instead. This particular knowledge changes you fundamentally. The version of you who once begged for basic consideration slowly begins disappearing. The person who repeatedly explained their own worth becomes quieter over time. The one who waited for late replies, uncertain promises, temporary affection, begins recognizing the true cost of living inside constant emotional suspense. You begin understanding that peace was never boring, consistency was never weakness, respect was never an unreasonable demand to make, clarity was never control, and love should never require the destruction of your own nervous system. As you heal, you become unavailable to the exact patterns that once controlled you completely. This is exactly when they may begin feeling your absence for the first time. At first, they may not miss you specifically. They may miss your accessibility instead. They may miss the comfort of knowing that no matter what they did, you would eventually return anyway. They may miss the emotional labor you performed for them constantly. They may miss being understood without ever having to explain themselves. They may miss your forgiveness more than they ever miss your actual heart. But time has a way of revealing what pride initially conceals from view. Once the distractions disappear and the excitement of freedom becomes ordinary again, memory begins doing its quiet work. They remember how you celebrated even their smallest victories, genuinely. They remember the conversations where you listened without any judgment at all. They remember the way you remained beside them, even when they weren't easy to love. They remember that you saw the frightened person hiding beneath their arrogance. They remember that you believed in the person they might eventually become. Clear throat, they remember the patience they once interpreted as pure weakness, and gradually they begin understanding that what they actually lost was never simply a relationship. They lost a genuine witness to their inner world instead. This particular realization can become genuinely unsettling for them. Being truly seen by someone is genuinely rare. A lot of people move through their entire lives surrounded by acquaintances, and yet remain psychologically unknown the whole time. Their fears stay hidden. Their insecurities stay disguised. Their contradictions stay misunderstood by everyone around them. Then, occasionally, someone enters their life and actually perceives what lies beneath the mask they wear. You may have been exactly that person for them. You saw their defense mechanisms clearly. You recognized the sadness hiding behind their anger. You understood when their silence actually meant fear underneath. You knew which memories haunted them and which dreams gave them real hope. They may find another companion eventually. They may build another relationship. They may continue their life successfully by every outside measure. But being accompanied was never quite the same thing as actually being understood. Your memory haunts them precisely because it reminds them of an intimacy they failed to properly protect while they had it. However, there's something important you need to understand here. Their regret was never your responsibility to carry. You didn't heal in order to become their punishment somehow. You didn't walk away so they would suffer for it. You walked away because staying required you to suffer instead. There's a genuine difference between those two things. Revenge keeps you psychologically connected to the exact person who wounded you in the first place. It allows their behavior to keep organizing your entire emotional life from a distance. You may be physically distant and yet inwardly still controlled by the desire to make them regret losing you. But true freedom was never achieved simply because they miss you eventually. It's achieved instead once their opinion no longer determines your peace at all. Perhaps one day they'll recognize your worth clearly. Perhaps they never will. Perhaps they'll admit their mistakes openly. Perhaps pride will keep them silent forever instead. Perhaps they'll carry the regret entirely privately and never offer the apology you actually deserve. Your healing simply cannot depend on which of these possibilities eventually becomes real. Closure doesn't always arrive through conversation either. Sometimes closure is simply the decision to stop waiting for another person to explain why they treated you in a way you would have genuinely never treated them. Their behavior already was the explanation. Their inconsistency already was the answer. Their repeated choices already were the closure you were looking for. The heart very often demands one final conversation because it hopes for a different ending than the one already written. It imagines the right words could somehow finally produce real understanding. But there are moments where silence is considerably more truthful than another discussion could ever be. Silence says, I've already explained enough. Silence says, I no longer need to defend what I felt. Silence says, I accept what your actions have already revealed clearly. Silence says, I choose myself now. This particular silence isn't cruelty at all. It's a boundary formed after communication had already failed repeatedly. Once you reach this particular stage, your entire energy changes. You stop performing your pain for someone who was comfortable, simply watching you suffer through it. You stop giving access to people who only value you during their own moments of loneliness. You no longer respond to temporary affection because you understand the real difference between attention and genuine intention now. You become more selective, not because you've become cold somehow, but because you've become genuinely conscious instead. Consciousness changes the entire way you love from that point forward. You no longer believe intensity automatically means compatibility. You no longer interpret jealousy as devotion. You no longer confuse chemistry with real emotional safety. You no longer call inconsistency mysterious or intriguing. You no longer romanticize the people who awaken your wounds, but refuse to participate in your healing process. You seek instead a love that doesn't require constant decoding to understand. This new version of you may feel genuinely unfamiliar to the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries before. They may accuse you of changing entirely, and they'd be correct about that. You have changed. You've learned that kindness without discernment invites exploitation eventually. You've learned that forgiveness doesn't automatically require renewed access to you. You've learned that a genuinely compassionate person must also know how to say no when necessary. You've learned that protecting your own heart isn't selfish when that heart has repeatedly been used as a place for others to abandon their own chaos. The people who knew the unhealed version of you may resist your transformation simply because they understood exactly how to control your fear, your guilt, your longing before. They knew which specific words would make you return every time. They knew your tendency to blame yourself first. They knew you'd accept one small gesture as evidence of enormous change. But once you become fully conscious of the pattern, the old manipulation simply loses its power over you. This is exactly why personal growth can feel like betrayal to people who depended entirely on your self-abandonment. When you stop chasing them, they call you distant. When you stop over-explaining yourself, they call you arrogant. When you finally enforce real consequences, they call you cruel. When you protect your own peace, they call you selfish. Don't let these particular accusations pull you back into a version of yourself that was slowly disappearing anyway. You're not required to remain wounded simply so other people can stay comfortable around you. Your task was never to remain permanently available to everyone who once had access to you. Your task is instead to become genuinely whole. Wholeness never means perfection. It means integration instead. It means accepting your own tenderness without letting it become weakness. It means acknowledging your own anger without letting it become destruction. It means listening closely to your intuition, especially when your heart is tempted to repeat exactly what your soul has already outgrown. A lot of people distrust their own intuition simply because it speaks so quietly. It doesn't always arrive as clear, obvious evidence. Sometimes it appears instead as exhaustion, tension, recurring dreams, or a quiet sense that something essential is being violated somewhere. Your conscious mind may create tidy explanations, but the body very often recognizes the truth considerably earlier. The body remembers inconsistency clearly. It remembers the anxiety of constant waiting. It remembers the emotional whiplash of affection followed immediately by withdrawal. It remembers the nights your mind replayed every single conversation, trying desperately to discover what you'd done wrong. Healing means teaching the body that love doesn't have to feel like danger anymore. It means learning to choose relationships where your nervous system can finally rest. The person who lost you may never fully understand the depth of this particular transformation. They may only notice the external result of it. They see that you no longer respond the way you used to. They see that you appear considerably calmer now. They see that your life continued forward without them in it. They may imagine you never really cared at all. But the truth is very often exactly the opposite of that. You cared so deeply that leaving actually required you to break a bond with the version of yourself who still hoped they'd become different eventually. You didn't leave because you felt nothing. You left because feeling everything had finally become unbearable to carry. And that's exactly why your memory may remain with them, regardless. They know the real difference between someone who never cared and someone who cared until caring itself became self-destructive. They know exactly how many chances they were given. They know exactly how often you tried communicating. They know exactly how many times you returned, still holding on to hope. They know your final departure was never impulsive at all. It was the direct consequence of every single moment they believed your love had no actual limit to it. People frequently test the boundaries of those they believe will never actually leave them. But every single test teaches the loyal person something important in return. It teaches them exactly how little their presence is being respected. It teaches them exactly how their forgiveness is being interpreted by the other side. Eventually, loyalty turns inward instead. You begin becoming loyal to your own dignity for once. You stop protecting the image of the person who hurt you. You stop explaining their behavior to friends who can clearly see your pain already. You stop translating neglect into mere confusion. You stop calling emotional absence just a difficult phase. You stop editing reality simply to preserve the attachment. This is a genuinely powerful moment because truth returns your own energy back to you. Illusion is exhausting to maintain. It requires constant upkeep. You have to ignore evidence, minimize pain, exaggerate potential, suppress your own instincts constantly. Truth may hurt initially, but it's genuinely simple. Truth says, this relationship isn't meeting me where I actually am. Truth says, their potential was never a promise. Truth says, Love without accountability isn't safe at all. Truth says, I can't build a future with someone who keeps turning the present into constant uncertainty. Once you accept the truth, you grieve it properly. Grief was never weakness. It's the psyche releasing the future it once imagined for itself. You're not only grieving the person themselves, you're grieving the conversations you believed you'd eventually have, the places you thought you'd visit together, the entire version of life you constructed around their presence in it. Allow yourself the grief fully. Don't rush through it. Don't shame yourself for missing someone you already know you can't return to. Missing a person doesn't mean the decision to leave was wrong. It simply means the bond was genuinely real, even if the relationship itself was unhealthy. The heart can remember the good, while the mind still respects the truth simultaneously. You can love someone and still understand they're not capable of loving you the way you actually need. You can forgive them and still maintain real distance. You can wish them healing without volunteering to become the place where they continue practicing their harm on someone else. These particular truths can genuinely coexist together. Growth is very often the ability to hold contradictions without letting them destroy you completely. Perhaps they loved you in the only way they actually knew how to. Perhaps their love was limited by fear, immaturity, unresolved trauma from their own past. But limited love can still cause unlimited pain when you repeatedly demand from it what it simply cannot provide you. At some point, compassion has to include you too. You can't spend your entire life understanding everyone else except yourself. You can't protect every wounded person out there while neglecting the wounded person living inside you. You can't call it love when your identity, confidence, joy keep continuously disappearing because of it. The soul was never created merely to endure endlessly. It also seeks expression, expansion, meaning, genuine connection. A relationship genuinely worthy of your presence shouldn't require you to become smaller. It shouldn't punish your honesty when you offer it. It shouldn't treat your needs as mere interruptions. Healthy love creates real space for two separate inner worlds to coexist. It never demands that one person disappear so the other can remain comfortable instead. Once you finally experience love like that, you may understand exactly how deprived you once were. You may realize you'd been celebrating the bare minimum simply because your emotional hunger had lowered your standards considerably. A single message felt like devotion once. A brief apology felt like real transformation. A single peaceful week felt like permanent change. But healing restores proportion eventually. You stop being impressed by what should have simply been normal all along. You start looking instead for alignment between someone's words and their actual actions. You understand that consistency itself is a form of emotional integrity, and the person who lost you may sense this change even from a distance away. They may see you being loved without any confusion attached to it. They may see you smiling without the heaviness they once ignored completely. They may see that the qualities they took for granted are now genuinely cherished by someone else. This can awaken real regret in them, but their regret belongs entirely to them now. Your life was never a theater built purely to demonstrate what they lost. Don't choose happiness merely to make someone jealous. Choose happiness because you've genuinely suffered enough already. Don't become successful merely to prove they underestimated you. Become successful because your gifts genuinely deserve real expression. Don't heal merely so they eventually return. Heal instead so that even if they do return, you'll possess the strength to decide based on wisdom rather than pure longing. Sometimes the greatest test arrives only after you've already begun recovering. The person may return eventually. They may speak the exact words you once prayed to hear from them. They may say they finally understand your worth. They may claim they've genuinely changed. They may remind you of memories that still carry real emotional power over you. In such a moment, don't listen only to their language. Study the actual evidence instead. Have they developed real accountability, or are they simply experiencing loneliness right now? Have they changed their actual behavior, or merely changed their approach to you? Do they want to genuinely rebuild trust, or simply regain access to you again? Do they love the person you've actually become, or do they miss the version of you who tolerated what should have never been tolerated in the first place? Real transformation is never revealed through emotional speeches alone. It's revealed instead through sustained action, real humility, genuine respect for your boundaries over time. A person who has truly changed will understand exactly why you're being cautious now. They won't pressure you to forget the past. They'll accept that forgiveness and reconciliation are genuinely separate decisions to make. But remember this clearly: you're not obligated to return simply because someone finally learned the lesson your suffering taught them. That sometimes you were the lessons itself, not the actual destination. Sometimes your departure becomes exactly the experience that forces them to finally confront their own shadow. They can no longer blame your sensitivity, your expectations, your reactions for any of it. Without you there, they are left entirely alone with the patterns they once projected onto you instead. This particular confrontation can be genuinely painful for them. Projection allows us to place unwanted parts of ourselves onto other people instead. A person may call you demanding simply because they don't want to face their own emotional unavailability. They may call you insecure while repeatedly creating instability themselves. They may accuse you of changing when they're actually frightened by your own growth. Once you leave, their projection loses its target entirely. They begin encountering the exact same conflicts in new relationships instead. The same emotional distance appears again. The same complaints return once more. The same endings repeat themselves over and over. Then memory becomes a mirror for them. They remember your warnings clearly. They remember your exhausted explanations. They remember the moments you described exactly what was destroying the connection between you. They realize you were never trying to control them at all. You were trying instead to save something they assumed could never be lost. This is exactly how memory haunts a person, not as some ghost standing beside the bed, but as a truth simply appearing too late to matter. Your memory may appear when someone else refuses to forgive what you once forgave so easily. It may appear when they need support and discover that not everyone listens with the patience you once offered them. It may appear when they experience the exact same neglect they once gave you. It may appear during birthdays, familiar songs, quiet evenings, ordinary places that still carry the imprint of your presence somehow. But you must not remain spiritually trapped, hoping that they suffer for it. Their awakening was never the final chapter of your own story. Your final chapter is instead the return to yourself completely. You begin rediscovering the parts of your personality that went silent during the relationship. Perhaps you laugh differently now. Perhaps your creativity returns to you. Perhaps your sleep genuinely improves. Perhaps you stop checking your phone with constant anxiety. Peace enters gradually over time. At first, peace may feel oddly empty, simply because you'd grown accustomed to emotional chaos before. Stability may feel genuinely unfamiliar to you. You may mistake the absence of anxiety for the absence of love itself. Be patient with yourself through this. The nervous system very often needs real time to recognize that calmness is actually safe now. Don't return to the storm merely because silence feels unfamiliar to you. Build a life instead that doesn't require constant escape. Strengthen the friendships that remind you exactly who you are. Create routines that support your physical and emotional health going forward. Return to the dreams you delayed while waiting for someone else to become ready. Read, learn, travel, create, work, rest. Let your identity expand well beyond the role you played in another person's life story. You were never born merely to be remembered by someone who failed to value you properly. You were born instead to become conscious of your own depths. Your life has meaning well beyond simply being chosen by someone. Your worth exists well beyond romantic recognition alone. You contain possibilities that no rejection could ever eliminate from you. The person who lost you may one day understand all of this clearly, but you should already understand it right now. You shouldn't require their regret to confirm your own significance. You shouldn't require their return to prove your absence actually mattered. You shouldn't require their suffering to make your own healing valid. You mattered when they ignored you completely. You were valuable when they doubted you entirely. You were worthy when they failed to choose you at all. Their late recognition doesn't create your worth retroactively. It only reveals exactly how long they remained blind to it in the first place. There's genuine dignity in leaving a place where your soul is repeatedly neglected. There's real courage in accepting that love alone can't repair every single relationship. There's wisdom in understanding that some doors must remain closed, not because hatred lives behind them, but because peace lives in front of them instead. You may still think of them sometimes. Memory doesn't simply disappear because a relationship ends. Certain people become part of our own psychological history permanently. They influence our standards, our fears, our self-awareness, our entire understanding of love going forward. But a memory doesn't have to become a home you live inside. You can honor what happened without ever returning to it. You can say this experience changed me without saying this experience must continue controlling me indefinitely. You can carry the lesson forward and release the longing entirely. This is genuine maturity. Maturity was never the absence of emotion. It's the capacity instead to feel deeply without surrendering your future to a temporary emotional impulse. It's knowing that loneliness can genuinely be endured, but self-betrayal leaves considerably deeper wounds behind. It's choosing the pain that leads toward growth instead of the comfort that continues destruction quietly. And one day, perhaps unexpectedly, you'll notice their memory no longer controls your mood at all. You'll hear their name and remain completely steady. You'll remember the past without negotiating with it anymore. That particular moment isn't proof you never loved them. It's proof, instead, that you finally learned to love yourself as well. Meanwhile, they may continue remembering you regardless. They may search for your specific qualities in other people. They may compare new connections against the depth you once offered them. They may wish they'd listened earlier on. They may finally understand that some people only enter our lives once, in one particular form. Even if you meet again someday, neither person is exactly who they once were before. Time changes everyone eventually. The person they took for granted no longer exists anymore. The version of you who waited, begged, chased, forgave without boundaries, has been transformed entirely by the pain. They may want you back, but they may actually be longing for someone you had to stop being in order to survive at all. This is the final consequence of neglect. By the time someone finally recognizes your value, the person they undervalued may have already evolved well beyond their reach. Their regret then becomes permanent because they can never return to the moment your heart was still open in that same innocent way. They can't unsay the words already spoken. They can't undo the nights of silence already lived through. They can't reclaim the trust after repeatedly treating it as indestructible. They can only remember instead. And memory can be merciless because it preserves exactly what reality no longer provides. But let's not end with their regret here. Let's end instead with your own awakening. The purpose of your life was never to become a haunting memory inside another person's mind. The purpose is instead to stop haunting yourself with questions that have already been answered. Stop asking why they couldn't see you clearly. Begin seeing yourself instead. Stop asking why they didn't choose you. Begin choosing yourself instead. Stop asking whether they'll regret losing you. Begin building a life you'll never regret living instead. The deepest victory was never that they finally realize your worth eventually. The deepest victory is that you finally realize it yourself. Once you truly realize your own worth, you stop standing before closed doors, explaining why you deserve entrance. You stop offering sacred parts of yourself to people who handle them carelessly. You stop confusing mere access with actual intimacy. You stop begging for what must always be freely given instead. You become the guardian of your own energy going forward. You understand that not everyone deserves the version of you that loves without any reservation at all. Some people must meet your boundaries first before they can ever meet your heart. And as you move forward from here, carry no hatred with you. Hatred is simply another form of attachment in disguise. Release them, not because what they did was acceptable, but because your own spirit deserves genuine freedom. Let them live with the lessons their own choices created. Let time reveal what your explanations never could. Let absence speak where your words were ignored completely. And let your life become the evidence that losing you never destroyed you at all. It introduced you instead to yourself. One day they may sit alone somewhere and remember the person who loved them before they understood how genuinely rare that love actually was. They may remember the warmth, the patience, the chance is given. They may understand they didn't lose you in a single moment at all. They lost you every single time they made you feel invisible. They lost you every time they chose pride over honest communication. They lost you every time they assumed your heart would survive just one more disappointment. And when they finally realize your worth, your memory may indeed haunt them forever afterward. But by then, you'll no longer be waiting around to be remembered. You'll be living instead. You'll be growing. You'll be loving yourself with the exact devotion you once offered so freely to others. You'll understand that you were never difficult to love at all. You were simply asking the wrong person to understand a depth they hadn't yet discovered within themselves. So walk forward without any revenge in your heart. Walk forward without begging for recognition from anyone. Walk forward knowing that what's truly meant for you will never require you to disappear just to keep it. Your absence may become their lesson eventually. Your memory may become their regret someday. But your awakening will become your own freedom instead. And freedom, ladies and gentlemen, is worth considerably more than finally being appreciated by someone who had to lose you first, before they ever learned how to truly see you at all.